Hi everybody, welcome back to Rabbi Cooks. It's been a good few weeks since we did a video and I'm going to try and do one this week and next week. Today we're celebrating Green Week in North London and we're making our own bread. And I haven't introduced my favourite sourdough recipe to Rabbi Cooks, but I'm excited to bring it to you today. Next week I'm going to try and take one recipe from this book, Hilary Chachio, the sourdough suppers, who makes an unbelievable sourdough pizza recipe which might change your life and is delicious. Today we're just doing a simple 100% rye sourdough. I'll show you what you need. It's in 3 stages. The first stage is just bringing the sourdough starter back to life from the fridge. If you want more information on how to start a starter, then message me and I'll tell you exactly how it's done. It's a 7-day process. It's relatively simple. It's never too late to start baking sourdough. Once you're in a cycle of baking sourdough, you need to bake around about every week or couple of weeks to keep the sourdough starter alive. Having said that, this is looking great, bubbly and alive. You should be able to see bubbles in that, how it's lifting out of the bowl a little bit. And that's been in the fridge for about 3 weeks and took about 30 hours to bring back to life from outside of the fridge. Super environmentally friendly to bake your own bread, just less food miles for each loaf of bread, and it's also cost effective because we buy quite a large sack of flour, about 15 pounds, which must bake upwards of 50 loaves. And if you're only doing pure rye, then that's basically all you need, flour and water, and you have delicious loaves every time. So here we have 300 grams of pure rye flour in a bowl. We have 420 grams of your best London water, and I'm going to divvy out some of my starter once this scale hopefully tears, reaches 0. So we need 225 grams of this delicious rye starter. Like I said, message me if you want to know how to make your own starter. You have to have a starter in order to be able to make this recipe. That's almost perfect. I'll just top that up with some from my jar, which has also been sitting out the fridge for about, that's 225 grams exactly. And for this first stage, all I'm doing is adding the 3 different ingredients: starter, flour and water. I'll put the exact ingredients underneath, the exact quantities underneath this video, mixing together. This first stage, I guess it's the second stage after kicking the starter back off again, kicking the starter back to life. This first stage is literally just making up this quite watery paste. It looks like a loose pancake mix. It's very loose and sloppy. All I do now is take a wet towel, a wet tea towel, cover that, leave that in my kitchen overnight. Can be for 12 to 24 hours depending on the temperature. If it's very warm outside, probably less time, and I'll come back to that tomorrow to carry on with the recipe. Okay, welcome back everybody. It's been about 12 hours since I made up my wet batter for my sourdough. You can see, like with the starter previously, it's got some nice bubbles in it, and that should take about 12 to 20 hours. Depending on the temperature of your house, depending on the climate outside, you need to be sensitive to see that it's risen and it's got a nice little lift in it, and that there's air bubbles starting and pockets starting to form on the surface of it. This has definitely done that, and it feels quite lively. Now I'm going to finish it up. This is the messy part of the story, and I'm just finishing my last ingredients. So I've got here 525 grams of the same rye flour, throwing that in. I have 18 grams of a nice tasty, that's actually like a Malden sea salt. And then I'm going to put in 3 tablespoons of molasses. Now I looked at my original recipe, and funnily enough it actually says 3 teaspoons of molasses, not tablespoons, but I've been making this recipe now for at least 3 or 4 years, and I've always used tablespoons, so like a good hefty chunk of molasses, and it tastes delicious and it has a really rich darkness to it. So I'm going to carry on with that. If you wanted to do slightly less molasses and have a slightly less dark loaf, then that's more than good. I've got my bread. It's actually Bread Ahead, another plug for Bread Ahead, who taught the way I first learned to bake sourdough with. I've got my dough spatula. They say that if you dip your hand in a little bit of water beforehand, then the dough sticks to you less. You can try that out, it does work a little bit. To this mixture then, on top of that, I'm going to add some sunflower seeds. You can really add whatever you like to the bread. I've tried some cooking apple for Rosh Hashanah. I've tried pumpkin and cinnamon, like roasted pumpkin and cinnamon, for like a Thanksgiving autumn taste. This recipe calls for coriander and caraway seeds. Never tried that. You can do some caramelized onion. It really takes whatever you want to add to it. And seeds and nuts are delicious, and it comes out with like the flavors that you want. You can also do a mixed seed and mixed nut. So I've done that. I've put probably 1.5 cups or 2 cups of sunflower seed on top. Then I've got these little, here, if you can see, these little pools of flour, which I'll come to in a second. On top of each of those, I'm just going to put a couple of seeds so that you have that kind of garnish look of seeds on top of the loaf. So let's start with that. The motion is like a fork with your hand, and you just get in there and turn this. I'm wondering why this is going wrong, because I haven't added my 390 grams of cold water. That would be important, and this recipe is not going to work if you forget to add your water. So then I'm going to go with my motion of stirring like this. And this needs a couple of minutes of quite vigorous stirring, so I'll come back. Hi everyone, welcome back. You can see that batter has a really beautiful multi-colour to it, and I've carried on with that quite tough stirring motion to get a nice consistency there, only a tiny bit out of breath. In order to make this is a very tricky bit, in order to try and evenly divide up 2 loaves, I just put a little line down the middle of the batter in order to try to get an even loaf. I've got 2 loaf tins here. My mother's yahrzeit was this week. 18 years of her passing away. I think pretty sure these are her loaf tins that I'm still using. And I've oiled them lightly with just a plain sunflower or canola oil, would do the trick. And I'm going to pop out onto the side half of that mixture in to this flour well that you can see down here. This is definitely the messy part. It's the least glamorous part of sourdough baking. I'm going to try and get that all onto the well there. And then what you're aiming for is to fold it over a little bit so that the flour is just on top there, and then you pick it up and pop it in. I've totally failed in that this time. The dough feels a tiny bit wet, but nevertheless it is all in my loaf tin. And once all the dough is in the loaf tin, I'm simply going to sprinkle across the top some of the remainder of that flour. So there is a nice flour coating on top of the bread. Just use the tips of my fingers to just flatten it down a tiny bit. You're not trying to flatten it, you're just trying to make it so that it has an even surface on top. And that will be your sourdough ready to go. That needs to now sit for a couple of hours. Also with a wet tea towel on top. The wet tea towel is really crucial at all of these stages. A wet tea towel on top of it, covering it. And what it will do is continue to rise and continue to grow. And through that you will see cracks, because it will start to crack in the top. And you'll know when it has some good, nice, deep cracks in the top of it after about 2 or 3 hours that it's ready to go. At any point, if you want to slow down that process, you can put it in the fridge and that will slow it down. You can do it the next day or whatever for baking if you're either stuck for time or if you're having guests or whatever that is. I'm going to do exactly the same with the second half of the batter for a second loaf, and we'll come back for the final stage of baking. Ideally, before you finish baking, before you finish mixing the batter, I just take a little piece out. Because this is under 2.2 kilos, I don't say a blessing, but that's me doing prishat challah, taking away a little bit of the challah, as is tradition under Jewish law. And if you were going to do that with more than 2.2 kilos, you can say a blessing for that process as well, but this recipe is slightly under. Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the loaf. It's risen up really nicely, about like an inch or like 10 or 15 centimeters. Looking delicious. It's actually slightly over risen, which is good because it means that the sourdough starter is very live and vibrant. You can see that the cracks have kind of disappeared in the loaf, but you can see how much has expanded and grown. I'm going to put those into the oven now for 40 minutes. I'll put them in like that and then turn them around like that after 20 minutes, 40 minutes in total, on 230 degrees Celsius in a hot oven. The oven's already heated. Before I do that, I'm just going to tip in like half a cup of water onto a tray. That just allows for the rising process and for the bread not to crack too much as it's in the oven. You can do that also with a spritz gun instead, if you have one of those, but I just put some water into the bottom of a metal tray. – 20 minutes on each side, and we'll see what happens when they come out the other end. Hi everybody. So these are a tiny bit caught on the top, but not too much. Hope it doesn't look too dark in the camera. Gives you a clue to always keep an eye on your bread when they're in the oven. The oven might have been slightly too hot, but this will make delicious toast and delicious sandwiches. Wait for it to. I'm going to turn this out onto a wire rack now and wait for it to cool before you slice it. Check out all of our other Green Week activities in North London and other how-to videos which are coming up alongside this one this week in celebration of Green Week in North London. Thank you for watching Rabbi Cooks. Check out our other videos, follow us on YouTube and on Instagram, and see you guys all very soon. Bye.